Hello, everybody, and welcome back to some more brew action here on TCGplayer.com. I'm Conley Woods, bringing you kind of the latest adaptation of the Eldrazi deck that I've been playing. That deck was primarily a black, colorless Eldrazi shell with some blue in it for Infiltrator and Fathom Feeder, along with some other experimental cards and some sideboard stuff. But I wanted to try white currently because of the metagame. The metagame has evolved to where there's a lot of the +1/+1 counter deck running around, the hardened scales deck, if you will. There's also a ton of hangerback walkers and a ton of tokens. So I was like, what's the best way to kind of attack that? And one of the ways exists in Eldrazi as Eldrazi Displacer, which has picked up a lot of play in Modern, and has kind of demonstrated himself there. But in Standard, this is just a pretty solid card all around. Completely ignoring synergies with their own deck. You just kill tokens, you kill hangerback walkers, you shrink a lot of creatures, you negate the attack triggers on things like Nantuko Husk, which is trying to get in there off of one attack, or an Ulamog that's potentially resolved. You can keep that from bashing in. All around, this card has just been it's obviously less good in Standard than it is in Modern, where you have significantly more mana and you can activate this more times to do crazier things. But it's been a pretty solid addition, and it's replaced Infiltrator, which was a 2/1 flash flyer. So Infiltrator is, they're both aggressive in their own way. This obviously can just remove a blocker, which lets you get in for some damage that way. And has some synergies like that. Infiltrator is probably better at flying over the top of creatures, but in general, we still kind of keep the same overall shell and approach. We're still very much an aggressive mid-range deck. We lose a little bit of flying, which is a real cost to pay, but we just gain all kinds of cool synergies along with just getting a really good value card. Where Infiltrator really only served one purpose, and that was to get in damage, and I guess sort of to exile things for Wasteland Strangler, but we don't really have a lack of that in this shell. So the other white cards that we picked up that kind of make this pretty interesting, at least to look at, where we didn't have them in the blue, is Suspension Field and Utter End. Both of these are removal spells to exile something, which obviously is nice for Wasteland Strangler. Utter End also gives us a better game against Planeswalkers, which we had a direct weakness to in the blue-black show. We had to basically just play flyers and beat down. And Suspension Field gives us some answers to some of the more annoying creatures like Siege Rhino, Kalidas, Thundermaw Regent, or Thunderbreak. Is it Thunderbreak Regent? I don't know. The 4/4 Flying Dragon. Just any creatures like that our other list had some issues with. Obviously, Utter End helps us there too. But these are just cards that deal with larger threats and a little bit more diverse threats while exiling things. So overall, pretty solid in our list. So that was the main reason to go white. I wanted to add a little bit of extra synergy with the Displacer, just to kind of like make it a little bit better in our deck. So I did add one Wall of Resurgence, which I'll get to a little bit later. But it does create a colorless creature. It is a pretty nice thing to blink. It's a good defensive creature as well. While playing offense, we're just putting out two bodies. Overall, pretty solid card, but just a one of. We'll get to the rest of this deck in a second. But basically, the idea was we have this blue-black deck that's functioning pretty well. I'm not even saying that it is a deck that we should discount and throw out the window. Still going to be testing that deck. But I just wanted to look into ways to kind of shape it into the metagame a little bit more while keeping the core strength of the deck. And the core strengths of the deck are certainly Reality Smasher, Thought-Knot Seer, Wasteland Strangler, Bearer of Silence, Transgressed Mind. And all those things kind of stayed with the deck. The other stuff's more or less support, and it does matter. Hangerback Walker is a good card, it certainly matters, but the list I think would be intact without it. Same for Warping Whale, same for Displacer, same for Utter End. You're going to need some amount of removal, you're going to need some amount of other threats, but they don't have to be these things. I think the core 2-for-1 elements and aggressive endgame is really what we're focusing on. So in theory, this list should play out very similar to Eldrazi, while just having some different interactions involved. One of the distinct differences, though, is our mana base. So before we had a 5 fetch land setup with a few basics and one dual. And while that worked fine, In theory, our mana should be better this time around. Now we have 4 Caves of Kolios, which replaced the Llanowar Waste as well in the old list, which was just a swamp that tapped for colorless. This is a true dual land in our deck that also taps for colorless, so kind of like the perfect card. 4 of these makes a lot of sense. We also get 4 copies of Shambling Vent, which helps us out against control. We did lose Infiltrator, which was a good card against control, but having some creature lands against control is pretty nice. This is a colorless card, so it can work with. I'm sorry. It is a black and white card, so it's not going to work with Ruins of Ornreef naturally. But if you do use it with Wall of Resurgence, then it would be a colorless land that came into play that turn. So basically, you play Wall of Resurgence, putting 3 counters on it. Then you can put an additional counter on it with Ruins of Ornreef after that, because while it is not active, it is still a land, which is colorless. So at that point, you have 4 counters on this, which is pretty formidable on its own. But the next turn you activate it, and you have a 6/7 lifelink, which is obviously insane. It also gives us, along with the 2 Tomb of the Spirit Dragons, it gives us 6 lands that gain us life, which is pretty awesome against aggro and just recovering in the late game. So overall, we just gained a lot more utility and cool things to do with our lands by going black-white instead of blue-black. We also have 1 copy of Seagate Wreckage because our mana improved a little bit, so pick that up. I still am not a huge fan of this because you do often hold a card like an Utter End or Reality Smasher or Bearer of Silence or something like that for a while, so it's not going to be active too often, but 1 copy of this, 2 copies of Tombs, I think is the correct split, but I could see those 3 cards being split almost any configuration of those 2 lands into those 3 slots. Still 4 Ruins of Ornreef cards, probably the best card in the deck still. Down to 1 Crumbling Vestige, just because we have more basics. We actually have 3 Plains and 2 Swamps, and the reason for this is that while we have more black in the deck, all of our black, most of our black, including the difficult to cast Flame Tendrils out of sideboard, can all be cast using Corrupted Crossroads, because they're all black colorless cards. So Wasteland Strangler, Transgress the Mind, Bearer of Silence, and then Flame Tendrils can all be cast with Corrupted Crossroads. So we have a lot of extra black sources in that regard. Whereas the Suspension Fields, the Utter End, the Wall of Resurgence, and the Linvalas, and the Mastery of the Unseens, those are all white cards that cannot be cast using Crossroads. So we want to make sure we had enough white to really support those cards. So 3 basic Plains in here, 2 basic Swamps. That's in addition to the 4 Caves, the 4 Shambling Vents, and the Crumbling Vestige. So quite a few colored sources. I was having a little bit of mana problems when I was working on the deck, but since then I've added the 3 white sources, so I think that'll help quite a bit. But yeah, the rest of the deck, pretty much as it was before. As I said, we're really keeping this a similar identity while just picking up some different interactions and changing some matchups around. Moving over to the sideboard, because we do get some different stuff here. We have a similar plan against aggro where we bring in 1 million removal spells. We have 3 Flame Tendrils, still 2 Virulent Plagues. I'm thinking about going down to 1 of these just because we do have the Displacers, which deal with tokens now. But I have not necessarily found something I would need to add at this time, so still 2 Virulent Plagues. And all those cards, along with the Warping Whale, usually are going to come in against aggro. When you do that, you tend to become this basically control deck. I mean, that's 5 Sweepers plus a Warping Whale, plus our Bearer of Silences, our Suspension Fields, our main deck Warping Whales, our main deck Wasteland Stranglers, our Eldrazi Displacers, our Thought-Knot Spheres, our Utter Ends, etc. So when you do that, you also tend to bring in 2 copies of Linvala. At least I'm trying out the Linvala. I think she's sweet. But you bring 2 copies of her in as your kind of finisher. You usually are going to be taking out something like Reality Smasher, which is a little more aggressive in nature and doesn't recover you if you tend to be behind. Linvala does that with ease, in addition to being a great card to blink with Eldrazi Displacer, because every time you blink it, you're going to get 5 life and a 3/3, at least hopefully that's the goal. So yeah, pretty exciting card to top us off there. Against control, we bring in 3 Duress. I don't know why I have 3 different art Duresses here. I apologize for that. But 3 Duress. Sometimes the Warping Wheel, depending on how sorcery based they are, or how many Jaces they run. And then we also have a couple Mastery of the Unseen, which I'm pretty excited to try out. Our main deck's already a lot better against control than it was before. Wall of Resurgence is a surprisingly strong card against them with making a hasty creature. We have the Shambling Vents, which are pretty strong against control. We have Utter Ends, which help us out against their Planeswalkers and their enchantments. So we have a lot of good cards already against control, so we're not going to be boarding out too much. But the stuff that we do board out, Mastery Unseen definitely comes in, Duresses definitely come in, and then some amount of the time Warping Whale and Infinite Obliteration. Mastery Unseen also gives us a ton of life, since we have a bunch of creatures. It also makes colorless creatures, so it works pretty well with Ruins of Oran Reef. For every 5 mana you get a 3/3, which is a lot better rate. And you can also use Eldrazi Displacer to blink a creature back into play for cheaper than it is, or at instant speed. So, for example, if you put a Thought-Knot Seer into play off of Mastery Unseen, you can wait till your opponent's draw step, blink it with Eldrazi Displacer, put the Thought-Knot... its Leaves Play trigger won't trigger because it will be face down at that time, and then it'll unmorph, come back into play, and then take their card during their draw step. So you can do some kind of cool tricks like that. It also obviously saves you a bunch of mana on Reality Smasher, which is nice. Same, you can also trigger a Wasteland Strangler with this. All kinds of cool things. And yeah, so that is the deck in a nutshell. I'm pretty excited to play it. I've been playing it a little bit already, but it has some really interesting matchups, especially the kind of grindier matchups like Rally. So hopefully we'll get to play against some of those. Also, pretty strong game against Ramp in general. That's one of the matchups I tend to enjoy with these kinds of shows, just because we have so much disruption and a pretty decent clock. So, yeah, we're gonna take this for a spin. I'm gonna join in a league here and be battling with this. So I'll see you guys momentarily. Thank you for watching. This is TCGplayer.com. I'm Conley Woods, bringing you some Orzhov. It doesn't roll as well as the Eldrazi, but Orzhov is what we're going with right now. Yeah, I'll see you right around the corner.